What's going on, folks? Anthony Armstrong here. Welcome into the Believe in Commander show. And that other face over there, that is not Brian Murphy, but he's still highly welcomed, highly regarded, fresh out of the University of Rhode Island. We got Mr. Joe DeLeon. He is the host of the NFL Draft Prospects podcast, First Team CFB Recruiting Show, and the Ruffino and Joe Show. Joe, thanks for taking the time all the way from Mobile. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing great. Just excited to be here and to be around everything that's going on. It's always just awesome to be in a situation where you're surrounded by all the top media folks covering the NFL. And then on top of that, all the team personnel. It's just a melting pot of opinions, backgrounds, you name it. And I'm just having a blast catching all the practices that are going on.
Yeah, you get to kind of rub elbows with some former colleagues of mine, some people who probably made the decision to bring me in or to send me on my way. So if there's anybody, I'll send a little hit list if I need you to help. Go ahead and just thump somebody in the back of the head. Just want to take them out for me. But while we're starting out, this is obviously going to be a little draft talk episode. What's your biggest takeaway just being down in the Senior Bowl, just this week? What do you got going on?
Yeah, I think the biggest takeaway amongst these upperclassmen that are here at the Senior Bowl, it's such a good offensive and defensive line group, particularly the interior guys. And there's just so many names that have really shined. And I've tried to spend time watching the wide receiver DB one-on-ones, but every time I wander over there to watch, I always find myself drifting back over to these O-line, D-line drills. Guys like Keanu Benton, Carl Brooks, Matt Bergeron, John Michael Schmitz, all of these linemen have just been going to battle every single day. And you could probably spend a whole hour just breaking down all of the top interior defensive and offensive linemen that have had really, really good weeks so far.
That's what I love to hear. Just obviously, I played receiver, but I love to hear about the O-line because I fully believe that that's where the game starts on the offensive and the defensive side. But speaking of where the game starts, we got to talk about our sponsor real quick. Bet Online, that's our sponsor. So, folks, head on over to betonline.ag. Use our welcome promo code BLEAV. You get a 50% welcome bonus. Look, they got NFL, they've got NBA, they got the NCAA bracket coming up. They've got contests, free contests. They got a little casino side. You can do parlays. It's fun. It's my favorite place to go and place a couple of wagers here and there just on the season. And maybe I haven't done too well. I tend to always favor Washington. But, hey, it's okay. You can go over there, make a few bets, and it's definitely where the game starts. And since you mentioned the O-line, one of Washington's biggest needs, at least in my eyes, and some folks at NFL.com and my co-host Brian Murphy agree, one of the biggest needs is to address the offensive line, and they're sitting at 16. Mm-hmm. Where do you see Washington going with this 16th pick?
Yeah, I think that offensive line is definitely the best direction for them because their issues, I think, have been the result of some pretty poor offensive line play. And you guys lost Brandon Scherff, which has been a tough guy to replace. And he, for the longest time since he was drafted by the Washington franchise, it was a staple amongst that group. Now it's, who's who and who's the best guy. It's hard to even really determine who it is with some of the inconsistencies that they have had. I think to consider in that spot, guys like Peter Skoronski, Paris Johnson, and then somebody who's done pretty well this week, Matt Bergeron from Syracuse has had himself a really, really nice week to maybe get drafted that highly, or if they traded back, he'd be there somewhere in that range. I am of the belief, and I don't know if you and Brian agree with this, but I think the Commanders need to be in the market to possibly trade up and draft a quarterback. I think that for all of the years that we have seen since RG3, since Kirk Cousins, the Commanders try to Band-Aid it for so long that they've lost out on windows of some really talented guys. And I think that they have the roster. If they draft somebody that is a couple years away, that team could really take the next step. And I'll admit, I'm a big fan of Anthony Richardson. I think that if Anthony Richardson is somewhere on the back end of the top 10, he's not ready to play right away, you got to pull the trigger and trade up. If not, somewhere in the second round, you could also draft a guy like Hendon Hooker, who's going to still need a year to finish his recovery, even though that it is ahead of schedule. But I think someone needs to be drafted at the quarterback position with those two earliest picks that they have.
All right. Okay. So, what is the likelihood? That's a good lead. And I'm not in that category of saying jump up and make another move for quarterback. But what would you think the likelihood would be if you had to rank it? Just high, low, medium. What would that temperature be? What do you think?
I'd give it like a high medium, so like a 65, 60% chance that they try to move up, because we look at the teams that are picking in the top 10, and there's just so many that are in a position and in the market for a quarterback. There are a lot of teams that are going to be going after the prospective top 3 guys, which are Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, and Will Levis. Once those guys are off the board, I think that there's going to be a race to get that fourth guy, which is probably going to be Anthony Richardson in this year's class. So I think there's a really strong likelihood. I think that if you're Ron Rivera, you need to be aggressive. If you're not, you risk the possibility of just having another guy to slot in. Is it Tyler Heineke? Are you confident in him? Can you sign and maybe get a guy like Derek Carr to come over? Through the trade market. There's just so many variables, and I think that I'd rather invest those picks in a future project than a veteran that might not pan out. We saw what happened with Russell Wilson. You don't want to put your team in a position where
Yeah.
you auction off all those picks and it just doesn't work out for a veteran quarterback.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, with the way their offensive coordinator search has been going this offseason, they've been telling offensive coordinators, "Hey, Sam Howell's going to be the guy." And I mean,
Yeah.
obviously, he's only got one game under his belt with 11 completions, but he played well enough in that team's eyes to say at least we can write him in or pencil him in as a potential QB1. And my thought is to build a team around this position. That way, later on, you can be like a Jalen Hurts, a Philadelphia Eagles, where you can say, "Hey, we've already built this team. Now we just got to get the one player in there." So I like the thought about the offensive line at pick number 1. But Brian wanted to ask. He's like, "What would you do with that second pick? If you did have to go, he wants to go O line and corner." And you're saying throw a quarterback in there. So are you thinking it'd be like an O line in one round and a quarterback in the second round?
It just depends on how they attack it and what the approach is for how they want to address the quarterback position and how things are handled, who the new offense quarterback. I think there's just a lot of variables right now. One thing too that is kind of an uphill battle for Ron Rivera is that we know that he has very outspoken about not liking rookie quarterbacks. So that might take some guys off the table. That's why I think that Hendon Hooker, if they don't take anyone in the first round, could be like a really cheap investment. He is somebody who is older. He's I believe 24 years old. He's very experienced, and he's so consistent. His deep ball is so accurate. There are so many things to work with, and he doesn't need to play right away. Separate from that, though, separate from quarterback, there's a lot of really good defensive backs that could slide in somewhere in the second round. Like a guy like Christopher Smith, who's been really good so far this week, could be a plug and play safety for the Commanders. But there's plenty of talent at linebacker, at corner that they could address. And heck, even with the depth on the offensive line, they could double dip if they really wanted to really, really address the offensive line with 2 potential starters going back to back.
I see. I can get behind that. I can definitely get behind just shoring up the offensive line. I've said on the show plenty of times, it doesn't matter if you got Joe Montana or Uncle Rico back there. If you can't keep them off the ground, it's not going to matter. It doesn't matter how great
Absolutely.
your team is if you can't keep those guys off the ground. So let's continue to move on a little bit. So you're talking about moving up and making a trade. We spoke about Philly, how they made a trade to get A.J. Brown. What player would you think Washington would be, willing to part ways with in order to make that jump into the top 10?
Well, I don't know if there's necessarily a player that Washington should be auctioning off. I think that if they do make that move up, it needs to be an asset for asset swap. I don't like, and actually was not a fan of the Titans' approach of getting rid of AJ Brown. Like that to me was hugely detrimental and cost them a playoff spot by making that move. Great for the Eagles, fantastic for the Philadelphia Eagles. I look at this Commanders roster and I just see so much young talent. Guys like Chase Young, Jonathan Allen, Terry McLaurin. There's just so much talent on this roster that I don't want to waste any of those guys. I don't want to waste the potential of those guys. I'd rather go with the Rams approach, just screw the picks. Let's get rid of the picks. Let's use the picks where we can. And if we're going to move up, we're going to do that, because again, you spent all this time filling positions of need over the past few years. I don't want to risk the future impact of losing out on some of those players.
I got you. And I can see, ideally I wouldn't want to have to get rid of any players. I mean, I know Deron Payne is a guy that they're looking at having to do a franchise tag to. They want to work out a long-term extension, but he could very easily be franchised and then traded. But I think that it behooves the defense to try to keep that guy in there, try to keep that strong defensive line intact moving forward. So let me ask you this. There's been a lot of success for Washington with their day 3 picks. I mean, 7th round picks, they've got Cam Curl, James Smith-Williams, 5th rounders and Derek Forrest, Sam Howell. 3rd rounders, you mentioned Terry McLaurin, Benjamin St. Juste, who made an impact on defense, and even Brian Robinson Jr., the running back who had a strong finish to the year. Of all your players you've been studying, who do you think would be somebody that could be a day 3 gem?
Yeah, one guy that I'm really high on right now, I would say Christopher Smith, who I just brought up, but I think he's done enough at the Senior Bowl this week to move into the 2nd round for me. But one guy who I was a little iffy on, I was really high on him in the summer, a little bit iffy on him after watching him this year, but seeing him this week has solidified his capabilities as I think as a potential starting guard / center. And that guy I'm talking about, Steve Avila from TCU. He is so powerful and his base is so strong. He's a little heavy-footed. That's where things get a little tricky. It's like, how much can I buy into this guy when his foot speed's not that great? That's where the concern comes and why he's probably going to stick as a 3rd round pick. But what is going to get him drafted as either a really high-end backup or a really consistent starter, if he eventually works himself into that role, is that power. I tweeted a couple clips of him playing guard and center, and it's not like he's just kind of winning the reps. He's dominating the reps. He's planting his butt. He's sinking into his hips, and guys aren't getting around him. And that power profile is so exciting to watch. And I think that Steve Avila does deserve some recognition for maybe being a more not highly enough talked about guard prospect.
How did he stand up against some of that top talent? Obviously, TCU facing against Georgia in the national championship game, and that either that may not be good tape to watch, but in my eyes, I want to see how you play against like the top talent. Like, are you going to cower down? Are you kind of shriveling up, hiding in your shell, or do you try to buck up to these guys? I mean, what's a young fella that's touted to be number 1 pick? What is it?
Jalen Carter.
Jalen Carter, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, those are the games where the scouts are looking and say, well, who's this other guy? Who is giving this guy problems? So how do you think he stood up against Georgia?
Yeah, I think that I'm afraid to really dig into that game for a lot of those TCU guys. That's kind of one of those deals where I'm sure from your playing career, you remember or I've had instances like this where like I had this a lot because the Rhode Island team I played for was bad. I can remember a couple times a year or at least once a year, a coach would come in and be like, we're throwing away the tape. We're not even going to look at that. It was that bad. I lost the game by 80 points my freshman year, which was not fun. But I kind of look at it that way. Like, it's kind of hard to really, because it's not like you lost and you lost bad. You got blown out and you got completely dominated. So I'm a little reluctant to look at that tape, but I give him a lot of credit for this week going up against guys from Alabama, like Byron Young, going up against guys from all these top schools. And he looks the part. He looks like he belongs, and he looks like such a really, really consistent player who early day 3, late day 2 is possibly a nice starting guard at the next level.
I can tell you, if that name comes across the board for the burgundy and gold, I'm going to give a little hat tip to Joe DeLeon, and I'm going to tell Washington fans, hey, you may not know who the hell he is, but you're probably going to have a pretty solid player because Joe gave him a stamp of approval. But, I mean, I can tell you I was on a pretty bad team. We didn't win very many games out there at West Texas A&M. But whenever you go up against some good talent, frankly, that's your opportunity to try to shine. You may not dominate everybody, but as many teams are going to be watching Jalen Carter and say, let's see how they win. He went up against TCU. If you can at least get a stalemate in a couple of those reps, they're going to say, hold on, who is this guy? in the purple, right? They're going to pay attention to that as well. So ideally, he kind of shows up and makes it known for himself. I want to ask you about just some of those top cornerbacks. I know you mentioned making a trade for a quarterback, making a selection at O-line, but if Washington wants to go and get a number 2 across from Kendall Fuller, what do you think about these guys right here? Joey Porter Jr., what are your thoughts on him?
I'm actually really high on Joey Porter Jr. My co-host Ryan is not as excited about him. He's really raw. He is very, very raw. And the exciting part about a guy like that is how long and fluid and athletic he is as a corner. He just moves so easily. Now, where things get a little hairy and where we got to be careful with a guy like Joey Porter, and we've seen guys like this not necessarily succeed, is he's really handsy. He's very grabby at the line of scrimmage, up close on guys, and then even downfield, which obviously that's going to lead to penalties. A lot of times those guys don't work out of those habits, those bad habits, but I have him graded as a first-round pick. I think that if you're willing to bank on the traits, bank on the potential, you're getting a starting level second corner. You absolutely can plug him into this defense. Not right away. He's going to have some bumps and bruises that he needs to work through, some growing pains he needs to work through, but I'm a big fan of Joey Porter Jr. and what he's capable of.
Now let's flip coast. Let's go way out there to Oregon, Duck Country. Well, we're going to go with the Ducks, I should say. Christian Gonzalez, another long cornerback. His name has been thrown around at that 16 pick as well. What do you think of him?
I was not as excited about Christian Gonzalez. Kind of the opposite here of Joey Porter. He very, very consistent, very explosive athlete, but at the same time, for a taller corner, I was not impressed with his flexibility, his hip fluidity, which is important for the position. I see him purely as a zone corner. I think that asking him to play outside of a zone scheme, I don't know if he can be as successful. But that doesn't mean he's not going to be a good pro. Like we see guys like James Bradbury be so good wherever he goes. He was great with the Panthers. He was great with the Giants. And now his impact for the Philadelphia Eagles has been tremendous. So having those tall, lengthy guys that are good at making plays on the football, reactive, instinctive zone corners is important. You need those guys to play in your scheme, but he is not versatile enough for me to say this is a first-round pick. Asking him to play outside of that is going to limit what teams can take him. But other than that, I think this early second-round guy, mid-second-round guy, that will be a really nice player on a team depending on his situation.
Yeah, he's a redshirt sophomore, so he's young in a way. I mean, you can say, oh, he's like a junior in a sense, but I mean, still redshirt sophomore. He hasn't been on the field that much, so there's still a lot to learn from that position. But if you have a lot of the physical traits that teams look for, that's definitely something that'll get your name called and get you picked up on there. Let's see here. My man Brian had this other question. What player has all-timer potential? I know this is tough, but you can't really project out 10, 12 years, but generally the only position I hear people try to project that far is potentially quarterback and an O-lineman. Never have I heard anybody say it about a receiver, cornerback, and those other positions. So who do you think is that guy that could be here for a long time and we're just saying his name to get into Canton eventually?
I think very rarely, well, first of all, in any draft, it's almost impossible to be able to say that there's a guy like this just from the draft alone. I think a lot of draft analysts are reluctant to do that, but this year is very rare. We have two guys. That I'm willing to say that about them. And there's admittedly a bit of a drop-off after these two guys. And those that I'm referring to are Jalen Carter, who we mentioned earlier from Georgia, and Will Anderson from Alabama. Jalen Carter is a freakish player, massive hulking guy. I remember like seeing him sitting down at the national championship player availability, and he was like almost as big as I was just sitting down in a chair. He is that big of a guy, but what makes him so scary, statistically, he's not going to be somebody who has 25 tackles for loss or 15 sacks, like crazy numbers for a defensive tackle, at least not right now. But his disruption makes him unblockable on double teams, even one-on-one. You're not going to pull and try and kick out Jalen Carter. He will mess up any play when given the opportunity. He's just that good, and he's not even close to his potential. He's already good enough to step in, dominated as a rookie, but he's got so much more that he can work himself into becoming even better. Along with that, though, Will Anderson, for some strange reason, we're overthinking Will Anderson. And I predicted this and said that this was going to happen after the historic year that he had as an almost Heisman winner, Heisman finalist in his sophomore year. There was going to be a drop off in our thoughts on him because everyone is going to be stunned that he didn't repeat the season. Well, there's more attention put on a guy like that. There's more deliberate effort to slow down a guy like Will Anderson. He is such a great motor. He's got such scary power for a smaller, leaner edge rusher. Like, this isn't a 6'6", 300-pound, JJ Watt type edge rusher. He's closer to 260. He's built like he's a 3-4 outside linebacker that is primarily going to be an edge rusher. He moves really well, but the power profile for his build is very, very frightening to go along with that length. I think what makes him an all-timer, though, is that motor. Is that when we get guys like Jadeveon Clowney or Myles Garrett, they're really talented and they get drafted high for a reason. But having the motor to go along with the talent is what makes somebody generational. And I think that Will Anderson and Jalen Carter both have that.
I like that. I like to hear you talk about that motor. I saw a clip of Gino Auriemma talking to his Connecticut women's basketball team, and he said the difference between great players and good players is that great players don't get tired.
No.
And when good players get tired, great players just dominate good players. Like, that's the difference. And when you get to the league, everybody's good. I mean, you just got to say everybody's good. And then you get on the field and you see who really wants it more than the other. So, Joe, man, I appreciate you taking the time. Is there any last message that you want to have, any little pub that you want to put out there for the folks?
Yeah, well, one just quick thought from the Senior Bowl. One name that I've been every show that I've hopped on that I've made sure to bring up, Keanu Benton from Wisconsin. Pay attention to Keanu Benton from Wisconsin. He has had a meteoric rise this week, was banged up a little bit at the end of the season, was playing primarily nose tackle this season for Wisconsin, which is not where he's going to play in the NFL. This is a pure 3 technique. He is so powerful. He is so quick. He's so twitchy. There is so much potential for Keanu Benton, and I would argue this is not a direct one-to-one comparison, but I would argue that he's having almost an Aaron Donald type rise in terms of his performance. I'm not saying he's going to be Aaron Donald. That's not anywhere close to what I'm trying to say. But in terms of him going from being a day 2 pick to maybe a mid to late first round pick, Keanu Benton has done everything he needs to do to move up in his draft stock.
They got him listed at 6'4", 315 out of Janesville, Wisconsin. I mean, that just seems like a big old nasty guy right there.
Oh, he is.
20 solo tackles, 4.5 sacks on the year. I mean, he's going to cause some trouble. Hey, look, they already had J.J. Watt came out of Wisconsin. He's hanging it up now. Maybe this is the next great Wisconsin Badger that's going to make his impact in the NFL. Folks, I appreciate y'all taking a listen. We've had Mr. Joe DeLeon on here once again. You can check him out on plenty of different shows. You can check him out on the Ruffino and Joe show, on the Believe in NFL Draft Prospects podcast, and the First Team CFB recruiting show. Thanks to the folks over there at Bet Online. They always give us a good sponsor. Use our code BELIEVE, BLEAV. Get that 50% welcome bonus. And also, team, follow us on Twitter and IG, and you can listen to us as well on Sirius XM, TuneIn Radio, and all those other fun streaming platforms. Joe, it's been a pleasure. Thanks, man. Well, good to see you. Maybe we'll have you catch on, in another month or so, whenever the draft gets a little bit closer.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. And I'm just excited to talk prospects. So post combine, let's do it again. And I'm sure we'll have more things to react to and to talk about.
Yes, indeed. That's when the speed comes in. You get to see the fast guys. So I love it. We'll definitely connect after the combo, Joe. Thanks, guys. Thanks for listening. Y'all have a good one.